Welcome, Sarah, to our community here. There are many talented students here, including my own in the graduate poetry workshop. And one of them, Elise Hochek, graciously accepted to give the introduction to you. So I will then move this to Elise. Thank you, Elise.
Thank you, Orlando. Okay. Sara Deniz Akant is a Turkish-American poet, educator, and performer. She's the author of Babette, selected by Maggie Nelson for Rescue Press's Black Box Poetry Prize, as well as the chapbooks Parades and Latronic Strag. Sara holds an MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop, has taught creative writing at multiple colleges, and is a current PhD candidate in English at the CUNY Graduate Center, where she researches 20th century poetics at the intersections of language, gender, and empire. In her essay, Language and Madness, Swedish poet Isa Berg conceptualizes language as a living being and claims that language came before humans, not the other way around. Berg writes, "The cells of language hovered above Earth looking for a host body. It tried to take over dinosaurs and fishes, but that didn't work. They were stupid, or the muscles in their speech organs were not developed enough. Then came a human. The invisible potential words attacked her, like mosquitoes that know that they need blood and have waited for thousands of years for the first human to evolve." This early form of language, according to Berg, was more creative than descriptive, concerned less with logic than with music, a kind of paradisiacal and timeless babbling, which only later turned descriptive when it was instrumentalized by patriarchal forces as a means to maintain power. Sara Deniz Akant's poetry is incredibly original and hard to describe, though I would say her poems enact or recall some kind of pre-descriptive paradisiacal language. That is with a caveat. Sara's poetry does not exist in the golden age of nascent language, so to speak, when things were happy and calm, but in the tangled and sometimes violent transitional periods when language first attacked her host, or when language in its paradisiacal form began to struggle with the turn toward description. In Babette, Sara's speaker recalls, "I dreamed the dream, I do remember, was being violent to a meadow." Sara's work is really the kind of work for which it is best just to hear it for yourselves. When I first had the privilege of hearing Sara read her work, or recite maybe is the better word, for Sara's reading style itself employs an older form of poetic recitation, I had just begun seriously considering myself as a poet and investigating what the world of poetry was and could be. Hearing her read, I was struck by her work's inventiveness. And though I could not classify these poems according to anything I had read or heard before, they stuck with me, and I believe played a part in my development as a writer. The reason I could not classify them and the reason they stuck with me is the same. Sara's poems touched some part of me that hears language prior to and up against its instrumentalization by patriarchal imperialist forces, the same part where the potential to resist these forces might be found. Please join me in welcoming Sara Deniz Akant.
Thank you so much, Elise. That was beautiful, and it's so good to see you. It's been, I guess, a few years, maybe more. Yeah, so the way I understood it is there was a class that read my book, Babette, and I don't know if that's who's in the room right now or if it's sort of a mixture. But my idea for this was to, because this is really great. This is such a large amount of time to read, I really like those because it gives me, I don't know, a ability to sort of form a sequence, a structure, a narrative. So I was thinking, but then I mean, I can't just read forever and ever. I've actually been talking a lot today, and I might have to clear my throat sometimes, which I don't want anyone to be afraid of. But I was thinking that I would read from Babette because I haven't been back to this book for a while. I mean, it will come into my mind in various ways, but I think it's really interesting to come back to it right now, now that it's been, I guess, 5 or 6 years. I mean, I probably wrote these poems in, I mean, it was published in 2015, so mostly like 2013, 2014. So it's really fun for me to think about them again. So I was thinking I would do that, and then we could talk about it if that is also on the agenda. And if there's time or interest or something after that, I can read newer work. Does that sound like a okay model?
That's very doable. Thank you, Sarah.
Okay.
Well, you know, this is your show. You do whatever you want. Okay.
Okay. Great. Great. So yeah, so I'm gonna read a sequence of poems from Babette. What do I usually don't say very much before my readings, and I'm trying to get into that habit because I think it can be a little cold. What this time I'm gonna do that I didn't really do before with this book is I'm gonna start at the beginning and kind of go through. I'm obviously going to skip plenty of stuff, but I'm going to kind of treat it like almost like honoring the way that I imagined the book being put together back then. And I used to break it up a lot for readings because they would be like 10-minute readings and I would choose different things. So I usually don't read the titles of poems. And I only say that because you kind of have to infer when I'm moving, but you'll probably see that I flip the page or something. And I guess what I want to do this time is maybe give some sense, mostly because it's interesting to me, and divulging this information now feels interesting. Just not like what this poem is about, but because I couldn't really do that. But just where I was at the time, and maybe what I was doing or where it was coming from. So I mean, I don't know for a lot of it. I don't fully remember. Maybe that was purposeful, subconsciously, but some of the things I do, and yeah, so I might interrupt myself, which is not in my normal practice, but I'm gonna try it. For tiny sons to enter, she takes in both in stride and no less stride an empty stride. The nerve to pulse beside the door dispersed in all found shelter. Live on and in, live on and for this Simre game in cosmos. Its after shadows what she wore, and hip bones dropped in silence. It's an eagle that's a thing. This sweat of eyes and dual fires fueled with planet fat. But she would parm, and he would sped, her back, the no-nest chambers. Lured by Dente into promise, it is not the whole unsaid. A fine-stitched thing, that's a terrible thing. This sweat of eyes and silence. Dual. I dreamed the dream, I do remember, was being violent to a meadow. It did roll on, then bit by bit, we found ourselves the one, and ha, I thought, so that was it. And well, now, so then that was it? But what it was, we wandered on, and then a throng. Loopberry, loopberry, loopberry on, loopberry, looking through the stars has none. A rock, a flight, the stormy wave. this seeking, this stretching out of hands. Blue phase, red phase. Let them dream, let them sleep. I am simply, let them come. Being stranded in a manner, yet how compelling for the flavor, going wild to the city quirks that opened on our backs. Bone receptors of our failures, wretched failures, sat in gardens. In the grass, it was our object, sleeping lions through the grate. Wrapped up rabbits for our blessings, toxic tempers on the table, crying no more wet by systems, await our dinner at dessert. Blue phase, red phase. Let them dream, let them sleep. I am simply, let them come. And this next sequence of poems, which is in the book, I never used to read this because it felt really unwieldy, and I didn't really just know how to read it. But it's titled Ghost, and that was at one point the original point of this manuscript being put together. That was the title that I like submitted it with and that type of thing, before I changed its center to, or there's nothing centered, but to Babette. So I was imagining it as sort of a narrative center. And to me, looking back, it really feels like a Midwest winter poem. I know it was the polar vortex. I didn't even have an apartment. I didn't have a job. I had graduated from the MFA program. My relationship was falling apart, and I was pretty depressed. And I really had no idea that I was writing. I distinctly remember feeling like, I'm not writing anymore. This is terrible. I'm terrible. Everything's terrible. But I was writing. So I think back to that moment now when I'm telling myself that I'm not writing, because I'm like, no, you are. It's just not in the way that you were doing in the MFA program or something. So, Ghost. Driving through a really empty room. It was intensely morning still, a moment in surprise, surmised by the common everything, the grave off heat besides. It was in silence, we were out. We were but out and passing by. The grasses blown, their distance shown a different kind of knowing. Is it a part of space? Is it a gorse in the glare of its own lace pattern, touching things to discover them, to keep with its tame and to keep with its living? No, it is not a part of space. It's a ghost in the glare, and it's going somewhere else. The past 2 years, she had been opening the door and entering the room to make it beautiful. She had been dusting and perfuming its curtains, so tidying and redecorating. It was always changing, getting older, getting better, as they say. The lonely mammoth hides his light and lights that would be flame. With fronts the ants, they faced their fronds, and resteth him that rodeth. What each in life, his life he honors, blow northern winds, blow on it. And fingers for a fire for to hold. In sleppy slake I itch, ye wake. I nabe clout, na cloth, na shon. I nabe clout, na shon. The whole flight was an accident, each molecule aviating against itself and others. Must we really linger here longer? And must we really linger here much longer? Our fingers curl the stronger into any other darker, into any other distance. Up to speed with her now, the door to the room locked and she could not go there. Everyone else could see the room, which they put in a museum with her name on it, but she could not get inside. They walk out onto the water, and let me tell you, they are meaningful. Quiet the clasp, the sand that is, now cry, she says, for me. For you, for who would not know where this train is going, but that it is and has been going. They are quiet, they are mean. As a woman fell off and her dog answered all these key things. She's in the mind of a millionaire's wife, and she's growing claws in the room with 4 doors. She pushed through. Return to the same flesh draped over 3 frames, same boxes of ice. What happens in here does not happen outside. Return to, I want the infection. But it is she, it is her rabbit in its very fine habit. The one who is left here and the one who is doing it. She does it softly. She returns to these same questions, the pickets, the pilots, and the all-compass pranced. I will not name them. I will not name them. I will wait for my very fine form. I scream. I embrace her. I won't say where. So what is left when light abandoned shapes were not so deepened in the mist? So what if we take hold? Ave, 2-flight Ave. If there was just one wing so pure, we still would punch them more. To desert these other silence for false islands, for to folded in their arms as a ghost in my dreams, as a quest anti-quest, as a plant of invisible seeds. For to look like other people is a ghost in my dream to me. I've also been thinking about, because we're sort of in quarantine perpetually, different kinds of quarantine that I feel like this book comes out of. And so yes, there's polar vortex. There's also, I believe that the next poems I wrote when I was traveling abroad alone, and I was, again, in some sort of apartment that wasn't my own, and I was trying to write, but it was really repetitive. It was just like trying to get words on the page, and eventually these poems came out of that. There's a lot of lost in translation feeling. We chop our days as we chopped the stairs. We chop for the host in his house. The horse brings no dawn for our ribs, our fine ribs, what the stairs are descending in dark. What are we of what we are made? There's salt, there's dust. We enter to enter completely. She enters to enter completely her scales. She enters where stillness will not be at dusk. She is 700 years to the end of her hand. 700 years chopped her deep scales deep. Land, land, cry the strangers who land. She enters to enter completely. What enters to enter completely is she. 7 cries of 100 hands, and for what? To the host in his dawn, to the horse on his stairs, there are ribs, what are landing in sand and in layers. There are strangers are chopping her hand, and completely. What lands is her landing completely. The next poem is called Cora Pink, and a different kind of quarantine. I mean, this is going to get old, this metaphor, but I was at a residency. I was at it doesn't matter about the residency. I was watching the Tarkovsky movie Solaris, and it's interesting because I recently rewatched it, and so I actually did come back to this poem in my mind a little bit, and I just really wondered how much of the movie is in the poem, how much of the poem is in the movie, or whichever direction. And I still can't really answer that question, I guess, because I've been in both places. But yeah. there are some sources for some poems. Cora pink, mocha choka pomanik. You are just in time for the lake bed. A horse trots Cora past. Just in time for the yellow balloon. Trot, trot, ovatron, trot, trot, tolak. Machines are approaching. The flowers are old men. Tolak looks down into the water. 10 seconds later, sees a flower, the future of his leaving beast. One is shaped an open garden across the lake bed, Pomanik. One is lost for every hour Cora passes by in pink. The children run torrential rains. Ovatron is the ocean is an air is but the ice plane. Ovatron is an ice. Tolak came back when the dark set in, came over on the ocean's ice. Cora remembered different pictures across the lake each time. Ovitum in the sky is white ovitums in the sky. The sky is filled with yellow birds, ovitums in the sky. Cora entered the fog bank. Pink items followed Tolak. I have since entered the fog bank, but have you entered the fog bank? Pink items followed Tolak. It's like I'm sort of telling the backstory here, but and I don't know. I guess it's as close to sort of get a backstory as I can get for these. But another Iowa Midwestern, I was in a big house by myself, sort of rattling around. It was also post MFA, and I guess I was just very lonely. But I was watching, it was a furnished apartment or house. It was a big house. It was furnished and it had this really big brand new TV. And I was watching foreign films. And I know that this poem comes out of that moment, but I don't remember what film it was. I don't know if really watching is the right term. I was looking at it or something. Ater bitter sarte bitter a la Marte show es beat. In the house there is a home at least a shoulder's distance from La Marte, and it blows between her writhing sails or when it is safe, is it courage too? Tostada seek La Marte. In the vista lies a background and it rises up for now, as once she rose to raise the sunken ships out on the prowl. She loves the men fell through the party's partly stationed door. The same we have been pounding here for hours. Body 12. Now cross the waist to scratch the floor. Do you not ever talk? The men will wear their white coats at the table. So 3 will stand for table for La Marte tabe tire. Our tongue will roll vehicular. La Marte vishne su. We drove and ducked the low plains, ditched La Marte, body 12. Now it is time to set fire to the motor soldiers. At rest, we go by number 906, at rest. Someone is living here in this number 906 startup. Someone is living here, Babette. She stands in ashes glistening with sweat. Smooth as the flame she was born of was always she, Babette. She was 30 years ago at rest. Now it is time for the absolute absence of any event. There are nests of clumsy language. There are hazards to Babette. The voice is dragging all by heart. Suppose the ashes lick the sand. Well, I propose the ashes lick the sand, she said, as though she were Babette. I look on human faces and see 9. The absolute absence of any event, see absence dragging heart between the sands. Someone is living here in this number 906 startup. My neighbor, my private enemy. Someone is living here. Babette. I also never used to read this poem, so I'm trying it now. I've heard the sixth generation has only one name, such as naked, such as the fish at the edge of the soft angled planet, its only living author, his output forgotten. Weave the wall, the planter does not. I've heard there are beings and lives woven stranger, yet still they're in the living, the comb or the stall. But there is no swell, so the fish are but colors, are but lives gently planting their eagles, their eyes. I've heard the whole planet has a sixth generation and only one name, naked name of the fish, for the fish in his shallow, gently weaving his exits. I've heard that you don't love your Pina, your peer, your pal. Whatever your name is, you don't love your Paris. I've been reading about what you found. Yet still I've heard of the fish and whether there was a stranger. I've been away a long time. My output increasing by God right before me. There's this whole Russian cartoon character sequence that Elise remembers because I used to use props that I'm not doing now, but maybe 5 years from now. The great is there, the great disappears. The line is there, the line disappears. The third blood tooth, the mid blood tooth. I'm in the space, I entered. The red cow bitch pointer didn't die by chance. We deciphered her faded hindsight hieroglyphs. Glyph, hieroglyphed. She's in the space, she entered. 70 times, and 7 took my counsel soul. Like a guide in the dark, switching through time in the half-gorgeous park. They rushed around me in a body, around me in a body, my human fixture and its satellite. Restore my radial bore. Give her beaver, give her party. And they partly glyphed the doors. 'Twas the ground up they had sprung, their linear features, their woolly young. And so delighted by a feather, darkened animal, heated form. We gave her several partings, severed language at the shore. Her hand had spread before her hand had spread, 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 before her mind, her glyph, her door. I am wandered in the core, at its door of cloisters, in the ceilings more and more. Send measure to the mansion, rush the bull from his dark shores. Et tu, Brute. He dismantles what I've built. But I keep this structure's lore, its massive massif, collecting box slugs, giving party, something floating, the invisible lodger. I'm gonna close this window because the music is distracting me. I'm in Bushwick and it's really fun here. It's like, always feels like a weekend night, even when it's not. This next poem, just because I've already paused, I did write at a residency and it was a really weird little one. It was like on this tiny island in Maine and everyone was really drunk all the time or hungover. And there were a lot of just very strange things about it, but it was a tiny island. Like you could walk around it in an hour. And I guess I really feel like this poem somehow comes out of that type of quarantine. She who wipes my Atticus chamber. Hey, Septima dear, my dark hellybug. That's okay, I'm just sinking in my little peeing yard. This left-handed mass was never authorized a place, stranger to itself and to others on the aisle. I don't attempt the castle. Well, that would be a waste, not only of mine eyes, but also of my hands. There's structure cleaning time. I'm the beast that wrote the note, constantly in the moment of its own act of becoming, forgetting what it was when what it was merely swamp, a tusk, a blunted mind of nothing but red aster, the bird-like flesh of old sawdust. My hands, they decorate a dungeon with a bunch of purple heather. My hands are as empty as the day I was born. Just a network of organs entangled in bone. A small globe, your sphere, hey, Septima dear, or what Septima took. Her mind, her glyph, her door. This is the last poem in the book. Poor ghost, its tools, its host of seven selves that rattles seamless into dinner now. Now grant the way. It is remote, blue distance, remote as blue, or so her credits run. And so it is, and so it is done. Beliza, Beliza, con ate seek Beliza. Beliza, Beliza, a sigh and a head, it is dusk. That continent dull, that endless standing must be standing on with eyes. The form that seek her throat. And all of these of the soft and the free would make no pattern known again. So that is the end of the book. In whatever form I just chose to break it into or navigate it through. And yeah, I thought that maybe we would, if there are questions about this book in particular, that's why I've sort of sectioned it off. We could do that now, or I can also continue reading. I don't really know how long that was, but I feel fine. My voice is fine.
How about, Sarah, if you read maybe for 5 more minutes or so, and then
Sure.
people can ask you questions
Sure.
about the book or about your poetics in general.
Okay, great. It might be a little longer than that, but I think I can do that in my head. I can cut. So I'm working on this it's new, it's new, it doesn't exist in the world. Manuscript, I'm calling it The Kingdom. I don't know if that's useful. And oh God, what am I gonna say about it? Maybe I'll say nothing about it. I think that's better. The Kingdom. I open a book. The first page reads, "Do not open this book." The letters have been drawn purposefully. They are enlarged and evenly spaced. I pause. I gently flip the page. On the next, I find a glossary. English to English, Turkish to English, bok to book, hole to hot, wake to whack. Yavash, yavash. As always, I've arrived at language sideways, at an utterance that hovers, at an utterance that has been once removed. In this liminal space of expression, I make out some words on the page. Chapter 1, Hoop It Began. It began in the NYC hose pit. It was purple. The doctor said I had a hot in my heart. Chapter 2, Later on. Later on in the kingdom, I went to All Souls. I live in Settle Pat Nest. I love Whiny the Pop. Later on in the kingdom, I made a lot of new friends. I won't name them. Chapter 2. What's a good name for American Girl? I can only think of those dolls. Annie? Emily? Bir Varmish there was and Bir Yokmish there wasn't, but hey, at least they were diverse. But hey, at least they all had their own stories. For example, the one I probably liked the most, I think her name was Perry. She hitchhiked from the terrible clutches of her demonic father and soon-to-be lover, Genghis Khan, all the way to a hospital in New York City, which they called the NYC hose pit. You could get there along a green, thick hose that people drove that had been attached to the Khan's long, red, pointy dick, which ran straight through the center of the Earth Baba, Silly Baba, gunning right into America's great big vagina, which opened up in the Middle Eastern side of Ada Manahat, Yavash Yavash. Of course, it was a little stuffy in the hose, and no one wanted to pick Perry up for a while since Genghis was so angry with his dick stuck in the ground that he had pounded the earth around him. Yavash, Yavash. The man who finally stopped was from Connecticut, and he was really drunk. He asked as a favor for Perry to describe her lover's penis in the great, great detail of her great lost empire, which was difficult because Perry had never actually seen a, how do you say, having only traveled through a hose attached to her father's, the Khan. The man from Connecticut seemed small. He wanted to party with Perry and wouldn't let her out of the car without a good mental image of how. Vidaka Lutfen Yatma. When they reached the NYC hose pit, someone pulled Perry out and rushed her into an incubator, gave her a sister, gave her a brother, washed out her heart and brain with a sponge so she would never remember Bir Varmish, Bir Yokmush, how to get back home. Chapter 3, The Kingdom. The kingdom set in Genghis is also flowing, leaking, flowing. There is slippage, real talk tracers. There are lines of laying in star. The bulb above informs my choking, sets the marbles in my mouth. But I must bless this beautiful non-scan. It's scummed up with Genghis Khan. Whereas the Silver Panther informs nothing. My false laying becomes a father, becomes a map without a home. Was the kingdom just my family, come in fable, wrapped in shadow? Was the panther just another bulb lodged in the moon? But then I felt a different body in the corresponding angel. I drew cold spaces for the nomad, called them Genghis, getting loose. For form, I then read false foam. For sublime, I slicked my thoughts back to the slime traced on my bed. Then Genghis was a matter of everyone, and he was only a matter of them. They are, write letter to self of self-spiraling, rewrite said letter, stab Langbald again. For position, I read poison and prison. For carcass, I read caress. Or maybe I read death cloud, or just rancid cloud of death. I asked my fam for future language just to have the sound of them. I formed a kingdom set in Genghis, and to the right of his scum was a star. So I have three others. Sure. They kind of roll into each other, but maybe I can end with, I don't know, can I keep going?
Well,
Okay, I'm gonna do the last one.
okay.
It's a pantoum, or it was supposed to be a pantoum. Chapter 3, The Scene. 182 pages spreads her story like disease. They send me one false daughter, Dracula, and then carefully erase the scene. She's been erected out of thin air with the thin air of money. In Konya, I scream. In Ulus, I embrace her. Well, these papers spread her story like disease. So what? So I name my daughter Saddlebag. I name her LO 915. The Dracula bitch that I Dracula prayed for would not carefully erase these scenes. Last night, P walked into a bar and screamed, my monster would be nice. It's true, this poem spreads her story like disease, all along the normal human trajectory, from poet to novelist, from diplomat to topless whore. But who could carefully erase these scenes of my daughter in striding, my sick daughter in striding, when once she was, when once she wasn't, or this poem spreads her story like disease, and I'll scream, I'll embrace her, I'll carefully erase this scene.
Thank you, Sarah. Let's give her a warm hand. Well, who would like to ask a question? I can just call on you if you, well, I don't know what, I guess the hands mean you have a question or no?
They were just clapping, Orlando.
Oh, they were just clapping.
If you guys want to raise your hands or whatever in your participation, it'll show up in line on participants of who goes first.
I can actually ask a question, and
Okay.
I'm just so awestruck by your reading and by this book, by Babette. But something that I was wondering about, I mean, there were several things, but coming across all of the words that were kind of like, it was something that looked like it could be familiar to me, like, you know, maybe I should know the root of it or something in sort of this uncanny way. But then it was like clearly not a word that's actually in, you know, any dictionary. Like I 100% found myself Googling like Ovatron or, you know, like trying to figure out what those words meant. And so I'm curious, like when you're writing, as to how those words kind of come to you. Like, is it just sort of like a sound that moves through you, like some of the language that feels like it could be a foreign language, but maybe it's not? Or, you know, is it sort of more conceptual and you formulate it based on what you're hoping it to kind of mean, I guess?
Yeah, I'm like always anticipating this question, and I think it's a really good one. Like I haven't gotten to the bottom of it, and so that's what makes it continue to be good. I guess that, you know, I don't really do that much of that anymore. I feel like it was a ability that I maybe have lost a little bit. But it was really like, yeah, mishearing and misreading things, and it was not intentionally constructed. I don't know. I was just, before this actually, in anticipation of this question, I was Googling the words again to be like, you know, maybe Lamarte is, you know, it's really right on the border of almost being these words in language, but they're kind of spread all over the place when I look at them. So it's not intentionally anywhere in particular, and it's not something that I've sculpted. I think I just liked, it comes from a lot of things. It probably comes from learning Latin at a young age, and also being sort of dyslexic and having there was like a chemical reaction with those things. And so I think I have these Romance languages like Latin ish letters and words and sounds kind of floating through me in a way that wants to be arranged. And so then when I look at something that my mind reprocesses, it like produces this other shape with the letters. And it like generates itself because of the sound. So I think sometimes there just isn't a word that goes there, but I don't really like bastardize words either, because that would be hard. It would be harder. So it's not coming directly from like a word source that I know about. And it doesn't have a direct meaning either. I've had like students ask me, what does Ovatron mean? And I don't, it's not really like that.
Anyone else would like to ask a question?
I have a question.
All right.
Can I ask a question? So I was wondering, you said earlier that you wrote in a different way than when you were a MFA student, in a way that you didn't really recognize at first as writing. And I was wondering if you could just elaborate on how that change happened and why you didn't recognize it as writing, or how you came to recognize it as writing at a certain point, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fraught. Am I or am I not writing? I feel like I've struggled with that question because people will always come up to me and say, are you still writing? Are you writing? Are you writing? And maybe it's just my personality or just the trick of my own brain, but I'm always like, oh no, I'm not in my head. And then maybe I'll say I am, but I don't feel like I am. So after, this was a long time ago that I was referring to, but that winter post MFA when everything seemed bad, not just because it was post MFA, but you know, I don't want to rehash that narrative, but I think that what happens for me is I'm collecting. I'm sort of archiving in all sorts of places and ways that it's not necessarily, I think it's becoming maybe more organized or I'm more aware of it. But in an iPhone note, in the margins of books, I find reading super stimulating. So if and when I want to write, which sometimes is a lot of time, I will then have all of these like places that I can go back to where the non-writing was happening. And so I've kind of realized that I have a lot of material around me all the time. And it will look completely different. Like I was just going back to old notes yesterday. And yeah, I mean, there's the fact that they got pushed away for so long, and then I'm coming back to them and I'm just sculpting a completely different thing. So it's like, whatever I want to say, I'm saying it through this pre-existing residue of a time when I wasn't writing, because it wasn't writing, it was more, I don't know, yeah, collecting.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Anyone else have a question? Well, there doesn't seem to be any more questions. So I think we can conclude for the evening. And once again, let's give a warm hand to Sarah for reading her wonderful poetry for us.
Thank you. Yeah. I was so honored to be asked to come, and I, just go back to this, always looking for, groups of writers getting together. So it's nice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, good night to all, and be safe.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for coming as well.